My name is Christian Harsa. I'm a senior reporter with The Lantern, and I've been the lead organizer for this event. My co-organizer, Josie Stewart, right over here, was instrumental in making all this happen. So at The Lantern, we have a commitment to informing our audience, and these events are part of that commitment. And so thank you all for kind of being a part of that. So let's get through some things first. Special thanks to the Center for Ethics and Human Values, as well as the entire Lantern staff and our advisors, and especially for our participants and our moderators. So this QR code is the event program where you will be able to submit to your audience questions. At the end of each section, we will be having a section dedicated to the questions that you all submit. So please do that ASAP, and then we'll move into issue 2. And we'll start off with the questions that we have pre-prepared to kind of guide the discussion, and then we'll move into those questions that you all submit. And then once that is over, we'll switch over into issue 1. Also, this QR code will be up throughout the rest of the event, but if you cannot find it or have friends, you can tell them to go to the Lantern, thelantern.com, and it will be the first story published up there. And once again, please submit your questions as soon as possible. Finally, to kind of start it off, Issue 2 is a panel of all yes voters. We were unable to find anyone who was voting no on it, and so we're going to be only talking about the yes, but that gives us a great opportunity to kind of discuss what many people are kind of feeling, and so we feel that it would still be a very constructive event. And so I'm going to introduce our moderators. So over here, we have Jacob and Elise. They will be our moderators for issue 1. And then over here, we have Mohammed and Oliver. They will be starting us off. And then I'm going to have our issue 2 participants and panelists introduce themselves. Sorry, Chad.
Hi, my name is Chad Schumacher. I'm a first-year student at Ohio State this year. I'm voting yes on the issue 2, primarily just because I feel that in society people should be able to make their own decisions and be responsible with substances like marijuana. And I think the big comparison is alcohol in particular. There's a lot of negative effects of alcohol out there that we all know, but we still allow it in society to be legal. Basically, that's my premise of my argument for marijuana.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a 1L at Moritz as well. I'm also voting yes on issue 2. The main reason why is the exact same reason as Chad. I just think that it's something that should be encouraged to be used in moderation, right? I think people should be trying to use this thing in a responsible way while also enjoying it. And I think the best way to do that is to legalize it and promote it while also being able to keep it safe.
Hi everyone, I'm Nathan Baldwin. I'm a 1L at Moritz as well. To kick things off, I'm in favor of issue 2 and wanted to give a quick quote. It's a little bit of a faux pas, but from John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's domestic policy advisor, later convicted for Watergate, as to why the war on drugs began in the first place. Verbatim, we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
My name is Katie. Sorry. My name is Katie Schaefer. I am a third year at Moritz. And of course, I'm here on the yes side. My general opinion on the subject is that regardless of the legality of something, if people want to use it, they're going to find a way to use it. So therefore, I just feel that legalization will make the use of cannabis safer, and that it could also lead to, making the cultivation process more sustainable, while giving the state of Ohio a chance to sort of catch up with the rest of the nation, state by state, but also just the general federal sentiment that has been evolving in recent years.
And hi everyone, my name is Andrew Roby. I'm a third-year student at Ohio State. I think cannabis prohibition causes a lot more societal problems than it attempts to solve. And it's time we regulated its use. A lot of my coursework, specifically in cannabis at Ohio State, has dealt with how the reform movement should respond to some of the public health concerns that a lot of prohibitionists have. And I think we have an obligation to acknowledge that there can be risks associated with excessive use of cannabis, but also to kind of push back on some of the reefer madness that we've been hearing over the past half century.
All right, and now we're going to get started, and I'm going to let our moderators take us out.
All right, thank you again for being here with us today. First question I have for you is, do you feel that marijuana should or should not be regulated like alcohol? Since I presume an answer from you all to be relatively similar, you can also answer, do you think that citizens and localities should have a say whether or not businesses can operate, marijuana businesses can operate in their area?
Okay. So I assume we will all say broadly the same thing, that we believe marijuana should be regulated like alcohol, like tobacco, any other harmful substance that we permit in society. I have a unique view on this coming from Westerville, Ohio, which was home of the Prohibition movement of the 1920s. It was still a dry town until 2006, that there was no alcohol anywhere whatsoever in the town. And if it comes to that and people as a town decide that's what they want, I think that's perfectly fine on a case-by-case basis. But I think ultimately most people across Ohio are in favor of issue 2 and will want recreational legal marijuana in their communities.
And it's also important to note that issue 2 does allow towns to vote against having cannabis businesses in their localities. The only difference between those towns and towns that do is the towns that vote against it won't get any of the tax revenue that comes from sales. So a part of the tax revenue is going to be put directly into communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs, and then part of it is going to go towards communities that have cannabis businesses within them.
And I guess I would just add, I feel similarly as the other two that have already spoke, but I think even, of course localities can vote to keep cannabis out of their town, but I think it's also important to people who might be on the fence to note that it can even come down to like the individual businesses and just like different places in the public. So of course, if the city of Columbus allows it, like should issue 2 get passed and the city of Columbus presumably would allow cannabis to be sold within its city limits, but that doesn't mean that, a local hardware store on 5th Avenue or whatever couldn't impose a ban within its, its general guidelines. So I just think it's important to note.
And then I'll just say one more thing to add. So I think it's important too, because legalizing it, people are going to still use it whether it's legal or not, I believe. It's easy to cross state lines into a state like up north Michigan, buy it, come back, and then we're missing out on all the tax revenue that we could have had if it was legal. And then on top of that, people selling it under the table, it could be more dangerous, could be laced with certain other harmful substances that we could avoid if we did regulate it like normal.
Yeah, I guess that's why that makes issue 2 a bit of a no-brainer in my opinion, because in a lot of laws, we have to consider the cost versus the benefit, right? We're gonna have the benefit of this good thing, but it's gonna cost like $200,000. I mean, that's scaled down. But not only is that not a problem here, but this makes money for the state. This is, in many ways, it's all benefit.
Thank you all so much for your thoughts. We'll proceed with the next question. Issue 2 continues to give employers the right to maintain a drug-free workplace. Do you anticipate there to be issues between employers and employees on marijuana usage, and should the state intervene? If so, what should this intervention look like?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
Of course. Issue 2 continues to give employers the right to maintain a drug-free workplace. Do you anticipate there to be issues between employers and employees on marijuana usage?
Thank you. I think that is actually a really important part of issue 2 is that it's not some proposed law that's going to allow the sale of weed, but also, allow there to be protections for people who use it, because I think, it speaks to the nature of this coming down to the choice of an individual, and in that employers also have a choice in how they want to run their workplace. So I don't necessarily think that the state should intervene on that. I mean, maybe with a particular fact pattern, I might be swayed otherwise, but I just think that, you know, employers now who want a drug-free workplace probably already have some sort of drug testing policy or something to that effect in their employment contract or otherwise. So I honestly think that although it's an explicit part of the bill, I think that it will almost be one of the more seamless parts of it, because if you work for an employer and you sign this contract knowing that there's going to be drug testing, I don't really think that there will be that much of a difference should the law pass, because let's face it, if somebody currently wants to use cannabis, they can probably get their hands on it. So I feel like it's kind of a seamless transition.
I'll actually take a slightly different approach on that, and that I think this will not only not bring into conflict widely, I think this will explicitly help Ohio employers. We are rapidly becoming the Silicon Heartland, and I think right now we're losing a lot of tech employees from the California, Michigan, Colorado markets who, let's be honest, the computer programmers want to be in a legalized state, and Ohio jobs are going to skyrocket, and Ohio employers are going to see the benefit of that as we are better able to bring these highly skilled, highly paid jobs to Ohio through the legalization.
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I also don't think there's going to be a lot of problems when it comes to that, and I don't think it's going to require much state intervention. At the end of the day, it's going to be an employer's job whether or not like people who work there are going to be able to do it, just like other people have mentioned here. Employers that don't want this realistically probably have a drug test already in place, and I imagine a lot of employers are just going to take the stance of, look, do what you want in your own time, but if it affects the workplace, that's when we have a problem. And I think that's the right way to do it.
I would just reiterate everything you said.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's important for employers to have this, but I also just got to say I don't think that there's anything wrong with somebody using cannabis off the clock if it doesn't affect their work. So.
Thank you. Due to the presumed higher rate of marijuana consumption, do you feel concerned of an increased opiate overdose is legitimate?
No, I don't think that. I think that the data is kind of inconclusive because we haven't had a whole lot of experience with it yet, but in states that have legalized, we've actually seen a statistic, we've seen a decrease in statistics of overdose, so there is evidence that legalizing this for medical and adult use can have a beneficial impact in that regard. I think that, sorry, go ahead. I think that regulating it also makes it safer, so you know how it's grown, you know where it's coming from, and you know what's in it.
I'll add, if anyone has ever been to a legalized state, these are not pop-up shops who are just handing out weed like it's candy. In legalized states, you can go and get lab reports done on the exact, down to the hundredths of a percentage of the THC-8, THC-9 content of what the product you're buying will contain. So if anything, the risk now is that it's the illegal laced marijuana, and once you have that legalized, overseen industry, it will stop. Like we said, data statistically insignificant, but you are seeing about, I believe, 6-7% drop nationwide in states that implement.
I would say I don't think it's going to be an issue just because the people who typically will seek out recreational drugs for those use like alcohol or opioids, I don't think it's going to increase because people like me, for example, who don't partake in that behavior, the legalization of marijuana is not going to change how I feel. It's like, now that it's legal, now I'm going to go smoke it now. It's just not how it is. For me, I don't believe that's going to be for the population at large. So I don't see an issue with that. And I think it will go into other outlets as well. Like people who are into opioids, they may end up smoking more weed as opposed to opioids, and maybe more of a safe alternative to what they currently are addicted to.
Yeah, and just on a final note, I would say I think a lot of the problems that caused things like the opioid crisis was a lack of information when it came to what you were prescribed, especially situations where doctors would prescribe pain medication post-operation, and it would just continue on like something like that. So it came from a trusted source telling you something that ultimately went downhill, right? I think right now we have a lot of information about marijuana. More studies are being conducted over time. There's a great measure being taken right now so that consumers know as much as they possibly can. So I don't think it's going to happen.
And I guess I'd just like to add that I believe it was in Colorado, but I don't have the article in front of me to confirm that. But so Colorado has, of course, had recreational legalized it was one of the first states, so for many years at this point. And I believe they published a statistic, it was either last year or the year before, about how even people coming in, not through the medical program, but just through the recreational program, the top 3 reasons that they cited for seeking out cannabis was, I believe it was anxiety, help sleeping, and pain relief. So to me, and again, other statistics on opioids are inconclusive, but it kind of indicates that people do want help, people do want relief, but sometimes they don't want to have to go to the traditional sort of medicine, that you would get from a pharmacy. So I think it could signal towards almost like a more natural and perhaps safer, less addictive source for relief. But I can't remember.
Thank you all for your input. We have one final question before we delve into the audience questions. How do you think we should deal with increased risks of driving under the influence of cannabis?
Arrest them. It's simple as. It sounds so stupid, but driving under the influence is illegal. If you're driving under the influence, regardless of the intoxicant, and the police pull you over and you're found guilty of that, you will still go to jail. That doesn't change anything under this bill. This bill does not encourage intoxicated driving. We allow alcohol to do it, and if anything, I'm sure they'll have some more stats somewhere else, but this is just another thing where if you drive intoxicated, drive sober, get pulled over, same rules apply. This changes nothing.
And to me, I even feel like legalization is an opportunity for police departments statewide to, do some of their own research and, probably with people. I don't know if you guys are familiar with how they learn how to spot drunk drivers, where they literally get people drunk and then have them do driving simulations in a safe setting. So I can envision with the potential legalization of cannabis, they could sort of run programs like that, learn for themselves how to spot, high drivers that are dangerous, and therefore, if people do start driving more because they're high, these police officers are able to know the signs and be able to stop them. But I also think it's important to note that regardless, again, there's a theme in what I'm saying, but regardless of legality, if people want to smoke weed, they can smoke weed. So if people want to smoke weed and then drive high, they can still do that, regardless of what happens with issue 2. So it's my opinion that with legalization, police can actually have more resources, figure out how to stop it, or spot it, and then stop it. And then I think we could actually curb it along the lines.
Yeah, I'll just bring up another couple of studies. There was one that just came out that found that in the 4 states that legalized in 2016, 3 out of those 4 saw a significant decrease in vehicle fatalities, while states that retained criminalization actually saw a slight increase in a 3-year period. Some people frequently cite a study that came out of Washington after legalization that claims that traffic accidents doubled during that time. But I think the way that they measured recent use of THC in that study is seriously flawed. They found that a driver was under the influence of THC if they had it in their blood, which when you use cannabis, it can stay in your blood up to a week, 2 weeks. It can stay for a very long time. That study doesn't really show that there's an increase in that kind of activity there. So.
Yeah, and if I can make a general point about this, because I would encourage everyone here to obviously do your own independent research, look at these studies, don't just believe what we're saying. For all the studies that we're going to show you today, I'm sure there's some sort of counter study that says the exact opposite. And what you need to do is important. You need to look at the parameters. You need to see how they define what's low, mid, high level use. And you need to understand the inferences that come from it. Because what you tend to see, as far as those studies generally, is that when you're using, yes, there's going to be things like delayed motor control, but after you take a break from it and completely out of your system, it's found to have no long-term effects.
And I would just say too, there is a study from the Bureau of Justice, you guys can fact check me on this. It's about roughly 1/3 of current automobile accidents that occur now are when people are under the influence of alcohol. So I think it's a very big number. And if we're going to be serious about like cracking down on driving under the influence, we would be also considering possibly eliminating alcohol, which I don't think anybody, or maybe most people in this room don't, want to eliminate alcohol for the same reasons I would say, because there are uses for it that can be done in a safe manner, and we as a society would not want to eliminate something just because it has some negative effects.
Thank you all. We're proceeding to the audience questions now.
Hi everyone. So our first audience question comes from an anonymous member of the audience. Issue 2, unlike other similar initiatives in other states, does not expunge convictions for marijuana-related offenses. Do you believe that such expungements should happen?
I personally, yes, absolutely. I think we have an incredible Professor Berman who, please look him up if you're interested in issue 2. He is like the national guy to be for him. Look into him. He gave great insight of any good marijuana reform needs to come hand in hand with criminal reform. However, there's a quick clarification for issue 2. Issue 1 is a constitutional amendment, so if the will of the voters passes it by 50% plus 1 on next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, the state legislature cannot overturn it. Issue 2 is a referendum, which just enacts a basic statutory law, which means November 7th, 99% of Ohioans can vote yes, and the next day it can be fully overturned by the state legislature. And I believe, being realistically, under the current conditions of the Ohio State Legislature, any attempt to have that criminal justice reform hand in hand with the legalization would be struck down on November 8th, regardless of what the voters want.
Yeah, I think that, expungement is extremely important, and also I feel like the end goal, but I agree that, we kind of have to do it in phases, which is not ideal, and from a social justice perspective, it's unsatisfying. But again, like looking at the Ohio State Legislature, it is unfortunately the reality. I would also like to point out that there are some other important provisions within issue 2 that do outline some attempt at it's kind of like issue 2's attempt at this social justice without being able to, kind of come all the way full circle and provide those expungements. This looks basically, this is in the form of using the tax revenue to promote and fund certain instances of, it says for the purpose of supporting social equity issues, providing funds to support jobs and economic development, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the sentiment is there, and again, unsatisfying, but I think for now, it's kind of the best it can do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's just really important to note that expungement is really, it's an important part of the reform that's being enacted around the country, and some states try to do it all at once, and some states kind of take a more phased approach. But I mean, I'll paraphrase I think this was a tweet I saw or something, but when the weed store looks like an Apple store, it's time to let a lot of people out of jail, so.
Yeah, I would agree with what they just said as well. And then also I would think in terms of letting people out who are in prison currently for serving terms of under marijuana usage or possession, you're putting more people back into the workforce, you're getting people out of situations that they may not deserve since it's legal now. I think it's only helpful for society in general.
I won't waste your time. I agree with what they said.
This question comes from Tyler Young. Have any of you studied the specific text of the law, and can you offer any criticisms of specific sections of the law that you may disagree with, even though you agree with the general sentiment of the bill?
Yeah, I can go ahead with that. So as mentioned earlier, a big portion of the law allocates the funding that would be received through taxes to various organizations. I would have preferred if they would have at least allocated some of the amounts of that money toward like general budgetary concerns, so we could see this as an improvement to the overall Ohio budget, right? I'm sure there's a number of programs. The streets in Cleveland stink. I would prefer better streets, and knowing that issue 2 helped that at least a little bit would make me feel better. But we can't get what we want sometimes.
I guess I'll speak. I know a lot of people who might be on the fence or who might be on the no side have concerns with the availability of children to get their hands on some of the products that you could get from a dispensary. I could go down a whole rabbit hole talking about my thoughts on that, but I will say the statute lacks any sort of requirement for cannabis products to be packaged in child-safe containers. I think a lot of dispensaries already do this. The medical dispensaries in Ohio I'm referring to, a lot of their products, if not all, do come in child-safe containers. So I would assume that likely that will continue to happen, but I do think that having that in the text of issue 2 could only help. I don't think it could harm anything.
Well, I think there's no explicit mandate for that, but the text establishes the Department of Cannabis Control, which would be under the Department of Commerce, and there is language in the statute that says they need to promulgate rules to avoid advertising to children and make sure that it's safe and that kids can't get their hands on it. So a lot of what I was going to say is a lot of it, I mean, I wish it was like a perfectly defined statute, but a lot of it is kind of left up to the department that the issue establishes. So there will be a bureau that regulates it, that makes all of these rules and thinks through it, in a way that looks at what other states have done and looks at what has succeeded and what has failed. So.
Me personally, I would like to see a higher tax rate that was proposed in the statute, just because I believe the current one is 10% right now, and it's not a need. Marijuana recreational use is not a need, so I feel like if you're going to be smoking it, you should be willing to pay a higher tax rate to contribute more money to the state. As well as I don't think we should be encouraging people to smoke weed recreationally. Rather, it should be allowed, and people should do it if they desire it, and they should be able to afford it as well. So if the tax rate's at 10%, I would like to see an increase for more.
Yeah, I'll just throw in, I think my biggest issue is kind of going back to that departmental control, that my concern is that there could have been stronger guide rails, that if the will of the voters is for recreational weed, I would have liked more definitive what are the next steps, instead of kind of kicking the ball to the courts and kicking the ball to the legislature and put it in their hands, and concerns that they may not be acting in the best faith in what the voters want.
Our next question comes from an anonymous audience member. Do you believe illegal marijuana sellers will shift to marketing more harmful illegal drugs that may fuel the opioid epidemic that Ohio is currently facing?
I would say not any more than they are now, because realistically, if there's profit in those harder drugs for like criminal enterprises, they're going to do that, regardless of whether or not they're also peddling marijuana. That's just the nature of it. Anything that has a market and that's illegal is going to be handed over to the black market. I don't think that's anything that we can change, and certainly nothing we can change with issue 2.
In the 1920s, Prohibition saw the rise of organized crime here in America. With the war on drugs over the last few decades, we've seen the rise of cartels in Mexico. I think legalization is what leads to criminality, not the other way around.
Just add that for any of those illicit drug dealers who might, hypothetically curb their sales towards curb their market towards a different drug because of legalization, I feel like if that were to happen, it probably would have happened when some of our neighboring states started to legalize, because that probably already, took away some of that demand to to some extent. I don't have numbers on this, but just theoretically. So no, I don't think there will be major issues, if at all, with that.
Going back to Katie's point earlier, this kind of takes cannabis prohibition out of the hands of law enforcement and gives them more resources and more time to focus on some of those more dangerous activities that we see around harder drugs. So ultimately, I think it'll have a net positive effect.
I agree. I think a net positive effect as well. I want to just reiterate Zach's point made earlier that if there is a black market for something, it's going to continue whether or not we legalize a substance that is currently not under the black market as well. So I think regardless, you're going to have that problem either or if you don't legalize it or you do.
I have a follow-up question in a similar vein. I'm sure you're all familiar with the rhetoric of marijuana as a gateway drug. Are you concerned about the legalization of marijuana as a gateway drug to harder drugs?
That's a really great question because I think that historically when people think about marijuana, gateway drug is probably one of the first phrases, or when they think about marijuana and being illegal, it's like, oh, because it's a gateway drug. But I think a lot of more recent research has shown that there's a lot of issues with the gateway drug rhetoric just because it assumes it's the whole correlation versus causation question where it's like, are these people doing more drugs because they did drugs in the first place? Or are they doing more drugs because they were going to do drugs anyway? But this new research has shown, and I have this written down, I don't want to butcher it, but it comes from the American Addiction Centers, and it basically explains that the common liability model, it's called, it better explains the relationships between early drug use and abuse. And basically, in like super short form, what the common liability model says is that addiction and drug abuse is more of a genetic predisposition or something that you inherit versus something that happens because of a choice that you make. And of course, that predisposition is revealed once you do start using drugs. So again, it's a tricky correlation causation question, but I do think at the end of the day, it comes down to more of a inheritable thing versus the marijuana actually causing the addiction.
Yeah, I have 2 points. There was a new Gallup poll that just came out a few months ago that says 50% of Americans have now said that they've tried cannabis. That's well over 150 million people. I think that if cannabis had a significant gateway effect, we'd see a lot more of those people turning to harder drugs, which just hasn't happened. The vast majority of people who try cannabis might try it once or twice and then stop or never proceed to anything more than moderate use. But I think that to the extent there is some sort of gateway effect, I think that prohibition can actually exacerbate this problem. So think about it like if you spend your entire childhood and adolescent life hearing about how cannabis will make you lazy, it ruins your life, it scrambles your brains, this is your brain on drugs, and then you end up trying it and those things aren't true, you might think to yourself, well, what about all of those other drugs that I've heard that are really dangerous, supposedly, and they might go try to experiment with those. So I think that if we're just honest about the risks associated with cannabis use and honest about the risks associated with harder drug use, I think that we won't see any sort of gateway effect with legalization.
If I could also add really quick, the same study by the American Addiction Centers indicated that for 65 to 68 of participants, and it depended on the decade that they were born in, that's where that range comes from. But for nearly 70% of people, the first substance they used was reported to be alcohol. And I know, like, alcohol is technically a drug, but do we really consider it a drug? That's up for debate, but I do think that it's important to bring it up that no one really talks about alcohol as being like the gateway of all gateway drugs, if gateway drug is a thing. So
I personally don't think it's too much of an issue seeing it as a gateway drug just because I think anything can be seen as a gateway drug. Like, for example, sugar, it's really addictive. So if you have somebody that starts off with eating like maybe 35 grams of sugar a day. That could easily increase or double that because it's very addictive, and it rewards the brain and the dopamine levels. And most of the time when we talk about addiction, we're talking about over-sensory of the dopamine receptors in the brain. So I think, even that could be used or looked at as a gateway drug, or nicotine, for example, cigarettes. These are all things that alter chemicals in the brain that give us pleasure, rewards, and happiness. All can be looked at as gateway drugs.
I think that if we were really concerned with people moving on to harder drugs, we would actually put funding towards addiction resources and addiction help. I think this is an entirely dishonest perception by the no side that we can have one or not the other. I think even if it was a gateway drug, so what? Let's legalize this and put more resources towards if you choose policing, if you choose medical assistance for abuse disorder. Either path you support, this gives more resources to help combat that.
Thank you. This is going to be our last audience question from another anonymous audience member. How do you anticipate marijuana businesses will receive capital given that marijuana is still a Schedule I drug federally? Do you anticipate the Federal Reserve to receive pressure from the Department of Justice to crack down?
No. Generally speaking, the federal government, although it is criminalized, they're not enforcing it, right? It's kind of like a discretion issue. Although they could be going after a lot of these people, they've wholesale decided not to. That's why marijuana sellers in Colorado and Michigan are not having these problems at all. That's why they're generating a lot of revenue and actually not getting arrested.
So we are here focused on the state issue. I think we could go for so many more hours and you could get a PhD in what the federal drug policy looks like. I know the Biden administration is not maybe as fast moving as many proponents would like, but I do know they are giving recommendations to deschedule it or lower the scheduling. But I think the point is right, like take a look at any other state. I think we're up to, or we will be the 24th state in the nation to legalize it. Every other one of those states have done it, and I'm sure in the American way, if businesses want to make a profit, then the investors will ensure that they get their share of the pie in that.
There's on every congressional budget that they pass, there's an amendment called the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which basically says there is no money in the budget to prosecute state-compliant cannabis businesses. So as long as that keeps going, which it has gone since Colorado and Washington legalized in 2013, 2014, then I don't think we have a serious problem of feds cracking down on state-compliant businesses. They probably will if they aren't compliant, but for the most part, I don't think there's a danger of that.
And I guess just a quick addition is that the medical program in the state of Ohio has been able to, prevail just fine in light of the federal regulations, or I guess the federal prohibition. So I don't foresee there being significant barriers to entry should issue 2 pass.
I agree as well, and I want to just talk about Zach's point as well. I think I don't see it as an issue when you look at the other states that have legalized it. They have, for example, Michigan is where I grew up, and there's new businesses thriving all over the place in Michigan right now, and it's of course the other states as well. So they're thriving in other states as well. So I think I don't think it's too much of an issue.
Well, thank you all so much to all of our panelists. If we can give them a round of applause.
Yes, and so while we transition, I would encourage you all, you guys can make your way to your seats, and I'll ask you all to come down. While we do that, I'm going to once again remind you that you can scan this QR code and it'll take you to our event program, in that we have the legislation for both of these issues written out for you directly from the state, so that way you can read up on that and make sure that you know what we're all talking about. Also, please keep submitting your questions. Thank you to everyone who has already submitted questions for issue 2, and we encourage you to keep submitting them for issue 1. And also, obviously, we're talking about issues that you all could be voting on next Tuesday. So if you have not already, please make your voting plans for Tuesday. All right, and now we're going to let our issue 1 panelists make their opening statements.
So my name is Austin. I am a senior in philosophy at Ohio State. And the reason why I believe issue 1 is, I'm voting no on issue 1, and the reason why is because I believe that fundamentally abortion is wrong. I believe that life begins at conceptions is agreed upon quite widely and scientifically proven. And also I believe that because of that, at conception you have the right to life, and so therefore fundamentally this issue 1 goes against that. Also, the issue is very vaguely written, I believe on purpose, and I will talk about that further on. But not very many terms are defined, except for just a couple, and even one of them is vague. So that is why I will vote no.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm a JD candidate at Moritz. I want to thank the Lynch for putting this on tonight, and I want to thank my wife, Adrian. Abortion is rightfully the most controversial issue in our country and has been for decades now. Because how you feel and fall on issue 1 determines what it means to be a person. A woman's right to choose comes into direct conflict with a woman's right to be born. That's hard, and there's a lot of emotion there, from all kinds of experiences and how to understand this issue. So, as voters, and more importantly as human beings, you deserve a round of applause for being here tonight, to listen to those tough conversations. Here for you.
Hello, my name is David Ambrose. I am a second-year molecular genetics student with a minor in bioethics. I'm a civil rights advocate and an advocate for ethics and equity in science, medicine, and legislation. Respecting an individual's autonomy is the cornerstone of all ethics, which leads me to my position on yes on issue 1.
Hi, my name is Rachel Davenport. I believe that every person in Ohio deserves the right of medical autonomy. And I believe that abortion is health care. That's why I will be voting yes on issue 1.
Hi, I'm Sydney Heckler. I'm a third year, and I already voted yes because I mailed in my ballot. I believe that fundamentally abortion is healthcare. It has been outlined by organizations like the World Health Organization that safe abortion is crucially important. And so I ask, why has the World Health Organization outlined that it should be available and safe, but American politicians still have not supported instituting it in America?
All right, thank you all, and I will let our moderators take this up.
Thank you. Issue 1 allows doctors to determine viability, which determines whether an abortion is permissible. Do you agree with this criterion? Why or why not?
I can begin with that. So issue 1 explicitly says within Part B, which is that abortion is prohibited after fetal viability. So fetal viability is understood to be about 23 weeks into a pregnancy. Essentially, to define fetal viability for everybody, fetal viability essentially means that the fetus can be born and most likely survive outside of the uterus. In many ways, that essentially communicates that before that point of fetal viability, this fetus is simply a fetus. It's just cells. It's not a baby. It can't feasibly live outside of the body. And so in that way, there is no argument about if abortion is the abortion of a human being. It's just cells before the widely understood fetal viability.
I guess in response to that, viability comes from a case called Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1992. The Supreme Court justices couldn't define what that word meant. And I don't know where you're getting 23 weeks from, but viability is intentionally vague. And it's a pretext for eradicating poor people who are predominantly Black and Latino. Corporations do not want poor people being born. Rich people do not want poor people being born. Abortion is an archaic institution that seeks to eradicate us.
In further response to that, so to say that it simply prohibits abortion at fetal viability, it then goes on to say, however, abortion may be, in no such case may abortion be prohibited if in the professional judgment of the pregnant patient's treating physician, it is necessary to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. Now define life or health for me. Well, you won't find it. There's no definition. Why? Because health can mean physical, economic, financial, social, emotional. There's a lot of vagueness to that, and it's by design so that the treating physician can then still say, well, it's actually okay, because even though it's viable, well, this health issue is actually allowing it to still continue. Also, to the point of it is just a clump of cells, just a fetus. Well, interestingly enough, the word fetus is Latin for offspring or child. Secondly, we are all clumps of cells. We're just more developed than the one in the womb. So either way, it's still human.
I would like to challenge the idea of safe and healthy being not explicit or clear, specifically because that challenges the idea that our healthcare professionals here in Ohio know what they're doing. They got their degree for a reason and are providing vital healthcare for a reason. In fact, the healthcare professionals are the ones who are making these active decisions on when a person who's pregnant life is at risk. And so to challenge that would be to also challenge these people who have gone to years and years of school and are board certified and their expertise.
I would also like to make a note on, I think that this is kind of lost sight on what viability is. Viability is the ability of the fetus to exist outside of the womb. If the fetus cannot survive outside of the mother's body, it is not, therefore, alive yet.
I would also like to address the topic of the controversy of a fetus versus a person. I don't think that this can be defined because that brings into question of what is a person. You could say that a person is just a body, or you could say that it is your brain, that it's the cognition in your head, but that would lead to, what about those who do not have cognition, those who are brain dead, do they not deserve respect as well? Or if it's sentience or rationality, children don't begin to become rational until a little bit after, they're able to walk and speak and talk and things such as that. So trying to argue on the point of this is a person, you could argue for days. Philosophers have been arguing for years, decades, centuries, back to ancient Greece on what is a person. So trying to establish your argument based on that is extremely challenging because I don't think you're ever going to get a unanimous answer. And to the point of poverty, of not being able, of wanting to eradicate poor people due to not being able to have abortions, overwhelmingly, about 75% of people who have abortions are below the poverty line in the United States of America. A lot of the time, they are young, cohabitating but not married, women of color, no religious affiliation, and perhaps have already had a previous child. You're statistically more likely to have an abortion. And forcing the people to have an abortion, or to not have an abortion rather, exacerbates the issue of poverty. Forcing somebody to raise a child, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially in America, without universalized childcare, without universalized healthcare, exacerbates the poverty issue and keeps people into poverty. So the only way that you are forcibly eradicating people in poverty is by preventing them from having their children, which is already being done. To quote a court case, there's a wonderful documentary from No Mas Babies that went over the court case of Madrigal versus Killigan in 1975, wherein a hospital in California was forcibly sterilizing Latino women who were predominantly within poverty and already had large families because they believed that they were doing the right thing to curb overpopulation. this bill doesn't just enshrine your right to have an abortion, but it also enshrines your right to have a child. So if you really want to take the stance of preventing people in poverty from having their children, you would want to vote yes, because this enshrines their right to reproductive autonomy, both to have a child and to not have a child.
Going off of that note quickly, I also want to mention that if you look at Section A of this bill, they explicitly line out the reproductive decisions that every individual within Ohio would have the right to make and carry out, including, but not limited to, this is a direct quote, contraception, fertility treatments, continuing one's own pregnancy, as well as miscarriage care, and lastly, abortion. So I just want to emphasize Section A, because this bill is not solely about abortion. I mean, there's an emphasis on providing a wide range of choices regarding pregnancy. And I think choice is the most crucial part of the discussion of issue 1. It's a choice. Are we taking choices away from people in Ohio? Voting no would be taking choices away.
I'd agree that 75%, this figure you cited, why isn't universal child care on the ballot right now? Because corporations would rather you abort your child than to provide universal health care and pay those taxes for that. Would you not agree that white supremacy invades pretty much every institution we have? Why not the abortion industry?
I don't think that's entirely relevant. I would argue.
It is. When a disproportionate number of black babies are at the chopping block, yes.
Could I challenge your use of language? Yeah, I don't think chopping block is an appropriate term to use.
I think rather focusing less on removing someone's ability to choose to have an abortion, I don't think that would have the same effect. I think focusing instead your efforts on promoting things like SNAP benefits, welfare, and those sorts of things, I don't think banning abortion would get that result. I think a more effective route would to take the route of not illegalizing abortion, but rather improving social benefit structures and safety nets to promote that would be a stronger.
I would also like to say really quickly, it's not an abortion industry. Abortion is a form of healthcare. It's not an industry.
So I want to, challenge 2 points here. One is that abortion is healthcare. One is bodily autonomy. Number one, I totally am pro-choice on abortion. If the unborn are not human, well, there's a problem there, because they are. Your bodily autonomy, a woman can do whatever she wants. And also, with her body, generally speaking. Also, isn't it odd that you cannot have drugs or alcohol or other substances while pregnant? Why? Because you are damaging and potentially causing defects in a child. So if you already don't have full autonomy right now, as law states, further, if you're going to, intentionally, as we say, abortion is intentionally killing an innocent human being in the womb. If you are doing so to a human being, then first off, you have no bodily autonomy at that point, because it is a distinct human individual, a distinct human being with its own DNA. So it happens when the sperm fertilizes the oocyte, or the egg as we say. What happens is you get a new human being with a distinct DNA from the mother, from the father, and it is a new human life. So therefore, if you kill that, if you abort it, then you are killing a human life. Also, on this idea of healthcare, and that it's safe. Yes, it is safe for the mother, I will grant that. Is it safe for the child being aborted? No, because the life ends. So therefore, abortion not only isn't safe for the one being aborted, but it's also not totally, you do not have bodily autonomy, because already you don't have that when you're pregnant anyway. But secondly, even more so, it is a human being, a human life. Therefore, you cannot intentionally kill an innocent human life in the womb.
I would also say healthcare is do no harm. That's the Hippocratic oath. How is abortion fall into that?
I can answer that question. So explicitly, in going back to Section B of this bill, they say that this bill is advancing the individual's health in accordance with widely accepted and evidence-based standards of care. So to pull from a couple different sources, widely accepted and evidence-based abortion is both of those. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which is one of the most well-known and the leading organization of medical professionals within that field, directly from their website, they say all people should have access to the full spectrum of comprehensive evidence-based healthcare. Abortion is an essential component of comprehensive evidence-based healthcare. Going off of that, harkening back to my main point, World Health Organization clearly states, Craig Lissner, Acting Director for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research at the WHO, explicitly says being able to obtain safe abortion is a crucial part of healthcare. Finally, Doctors Without Borders, one of the leading non-governmental organizations internationally, provides abortion as one of their healthcare. So I guess my point in providing you with all these leading medical sources and their opinions on abortion is going back to my main point, which is who are, we or people who are voting no on issue 1 to challenge these board-passed medical officials who have been working in this field for years and understand what's best both for their patients and they understand what's best for America as a whole.
We're going to take this opportunity to transition to the next question. We will continue on the subject of doctors' role in abortion and healthcare. This bill places bodily autonomy in the hands of the person carrying the fetus and the medical professionals, most notably our doctors. Should the state have jurisdiction over this decision? I'd like to hear from everyone before we all respond to each other.
I guess I don't quite understand the question. Can you repeat that?
Yes, this bill, issue 1, places the bodily autonomy of the patient in the one that would consider having an abortion in the hands of their doctor. Should the state have jurisdiction over that decision?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we have jurisdiction as the state in every medical decision. Medical malpractice happens a lot. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, to say that doctors are we should just trust doctors. Doctors have done some pretty heinous things. You look at any sort of doctor going back into the 20th century and the origins of abortion being in eugenics and trying to, again, eradicate poor people and eradicate people who we look at as lesser. I mean, the country of Iceland bragged about the fact that they eradicated mental retardation in their country. That's eugenics. Do I have a source? Just look it up.
Okay, sorry, could I answer that question?
Yes.
From over here? You discussed bodily autonomy, correct? That was the question. Could you ask it one more time? I'm sorry.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
This bill, issue 1, places the concept of bodily autonomy in the hands of the person carrying the fetus and their doctor. Should the state have jurisdiction over that decision?
Okay, thank you so much. So I wanted to sort of bring up a couple statistics, which is the idea that generally those that are leading the charge on anti-issue 1 affiliate more with the conservative politics or the Republican Party. Pew Research Center reports that 72% of conservative affiliated adults in Ohio believe the government should be small in size. I would like to point out that a yes vote on issue 1 absolutely aligns with the value of small government, specifically removing government involvement in private medical autonomy, especially as it comes to reproductive access. So I think in a lot of ways, this bill should be universally supported by those across all aisles because it appeals to many different values and beliefs. Further, I wanted to bring up that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before 45 years old. So if you think about your close friends, your close family, would you criminalize them? Would you tell them you can't make a decision about your own body, that the state solely is the one that can make that decision? Those are just a couple questions that I wanted to bring up as it comes to bodily autonomy.
Well, first of all, the heartbeat bill does
Please
not
allow
criminalize.
the
I'd have to
panelists
respond to that.
Well, you'll get a chance after everyone gets to respond. So-
Yeah, so I would say yes, because this is not simply a matter of healthcare. This is a matter of a moral issue. That moral issue, of course, being the intentional killing of human life. So yes, the laws already are on the books for, killing people. That's, killing human beings. That's already there. And so I believe that should extend, the right to life should extend to those in the womb from the moment of conception, again, because they are human beings. And so because of that, I think that yes, the state should absolutely have jurisdiction over a moral issue.
I think the firm answer to this is no. The state should not have any jurisdiction. The state, at its core, is politicians. These are people who do not have medical degrees, who would not know how to help somebody in this situation, would not and does not have the knowledge to be able to control what a person does with their body, especially if that person is pregnant. I think at the end of the day that this is a very complicated issue, but back to her point about small government, if you truly believe that you have the right to make your own medical decisions, then this is part of it. And I think that this goes along the same, right, the same people who are saying, no, you should not have medical autonomy for having an abortion are, in general, the same people who were upset when the government had vaccine mandates, or at least wanted vaccine mandates, because when it's that situation, then you should have bodily autonomy. It goes both ways.
I would also like to make the point that just because it is morally wrong, this does not automatically mean that it needs to be legislated. For instance, lying, that is wrong, but to try and across the board ban it, such as the abortion ban bans it across the board, no exceptions. If we tried to ban lying across the board with no exceptions, then that would be just a logistical nightmare. So instead, we outlaw it in very specific instances, such as libel, slander, lying in a court of law, things like that. A wide sweeping ban just would not be very effective, even though it is morally wrong. And on the flip side, we illegalize things that aren't morally wrong, such as parking on Lane Avenue during any day of the week besides a Sunday is not morally wrong. But we still illegalize it because of a logistical concern. So conflating morality with legality is legalism, and it's just a very logistical nightmare, especially when you consider that ethics and morals have continually been debated, again, since the beginning of human thought. And trying to universally agree that something is bad is pretty challenging. In addition, things like, just as we were talking about, or as our fellow panelists were talking about during the drug panel, just because, again, something is morally wrong doesn't mean that regulating it and legalizing it is going to produce the effect that you want. Just because you ban abortion doesn't mean that it's going to stop. Just because you block the supply doesn't mean that the demand changes. The demand just shifts to the black market. If you really want to curb abortion, going the legal route in this way of banning it is going to basically see the same effect as the war on drugs did, which is an increase in drug, an increase in black market, an increase in deaths and in mortality rates. And it's also going to see an increase in poverty because people are going to be forced to give birth to their child, and they're not going to have the supplies or necessary resources to help take care of this child. Just because you force somebody to give birth when they cannot have this child for whatever reason, that doesn't automatically mean that it's just going to funnel into a happy family. And I would also like to point out that maintaining the ban effectively reduces your right to choose what happens to you bodily. And to try not to get to a slippery slope effect, this can lead to a slippery slope. But as we begin to let the government decide what we should do in our medical decisions, they can continue to do that, such as if it's legal to ban somebody from seeking out medical care, why not make it illegal to not have certain medical care, such as getting the vaccines? That, once again, the vaccines are a person's autonomous right. So it's a very similar slope. So just because it may not, like we could argue all day long on whether it's moral or not moral, but that doesn't automatically mean, like if it's immoral, it doesn't automatically assume that we need to legislate it.
Last time I checked, murder was always immoral, so you lost me on that one.
Wow.
Furthermore, again, back to this bodily autonomy idea. I noticed that that's just kind of the same thing being mentioned. Again, like I said before, bodily autonomy, fine. When it comes to the end of someone's life intentionally, that's when I say no. Again, this is a human life from conception. We know this biologically. 96% of biologists said that in a research by Stephen Jacobs. Wrote his dissertation on this to get his PhD. So he said that 96% of biologists agree in this. There were 4 questions he asked them. Well, the first one, before he got to the 4, were, is this an important topic? Is this an important question? Well, of course it is. When does human life begin? Because it's obviously, with issue 1 and with abortion in general, it's a huge thing. Then he asked 2 implicit questions about, mammals and, okay, so how about, the fetus of a mammal? Because there are more, animals and other mammals out there that reproduce the same way we do. So is it still, does life begin at conception for them as well? Granted, animals and people, not the same. But still, the idea is life begins at conception. And they mostly agree. Even the more pro-choice ones agree. Then he asked the final question, the third question. He said, does life begin at fertilization in human beings? Again, the vast majority, even the ones who are extremely pro-choice, 70% of them said yes. So, and of course it increases as you go more pro-life. But at the same time, they showed that yes, we 100% understand, at least on a vast majority scale, that life begins at conception, the moment of conception. And then from there he asked, so then the fourth question was an essay question, it was more of an essay, and he said, okay, so when do you think life begins? And again, the vast majority of them, in a more short response way, said conception. There were some that said, maybe pre-viability, viability at birth, but those were minuscule compared to the 80+% across the board on that particular question that said life begins at conception. So again, when you are talking about the intentional killing of life in the womb, that means that they have value. Now that if we're all about human rights here, then we understand that the human is at conception. Okay, that must mean that they have now some value. Is it their size? No, because a lot of us are bigger and smaller than other people. Okay, so it can be size. Is it level of development? Well, a 1-year-old is still not as developed as I am, so doesn't get the value from that. Okay. How about environment? In the womb versus out of the womb, is there a change of value? No. If I go to a country where they have more loose ideas of when life begins, so maybe here it's conception, maybe somewhere else it's 20 weeks, does that mean that if your mother's pregnant at 10 weeks and goes there, you're no longer a valued person? No. And then the fourth one is degree of dependency. Does it matter how dependent you are on another person that gives you value? No. What is it? What gives all humans the same value? Well, it's in the question, our humanity. And that's at conception, which means that we have value, and that value is you have the right to life. Which means that if you're going to legalize abortion at all, I would say that that is completely antithetical to the idea of not murdering human beings.
Can I ask I'd like to ask just one clarifying question. So we want to get back to abortion as healthcare.
Well, can I respond to that really quick, just because you guys had the floor for a sec?
You had the floor for a while now. I'd like to ask, you didn't even ask you a question. Can I just ask you a question? This is going back to your point about abortion as healthcare.
You can respond briefly.
I have a very brief.
You didn't let me respond before.
Well, and then you can ask your question.
Okay.
I have really, really brief response. I just wanted to challenge the idea of abortion as murder, because alternatively, I would argue that not providing abortion is actually murder. Because the Guttmacher Institute basically says that In the most recent estimates, 35 million women have abortions under unsafe conditions, and 20 million of those women, so the majority, end up needing, but not always receiving, so they may die, medical care for complications from unsafe abortion. That's a direct quote from the Guttmacher Institute. I think it's really crucial that we understand that not providing abortion creates murder.
I'd just like to ask one question. So, what would you say to somebody that says, you know, there are a lot of psychological effects that I can receive after an abortion procedure that can last years and years and years, and that might violate the do no harm principle?
I would argue, can you rephrase your question?
So, and I'll say the studies on this are varied. You know, you could say that there's an emphasis on, well, there's no psychological harm that you can incur at all. And then there's others that say, yeah, you know, there are. And the thing is that I would say, you know, everyone's different. Everyone's going to experience things different. Why do we emphasize abortion as an institution when you're not even listening to my question?
No, yeah.
Okay. I worry about the woman that is vulnerable and has this procedure and is told there's going to be no psychological effects at all. You're going to suffer nothing. And she lives a lifetime of depression and mental health issues.
I can respond to that. I could say the same thing about the other side. What about the person that it has to have a child that one, maybe their body is not medically fit for, or that they are not prepared mentally for, or that they do not have the funds for? Can go both ways. But what I can tell you is that people who do have abortions, there are a lot of resources out there to help them through that. And there aren't always resources out there, or there should be more resources out there that are meant to help people who do end up going through with the pregnancy. But it goes both ways, because there are people who have to have these because of their state laws, and they will live a lifetime of regret because they were not able to get access to health care.
I was just really quick going to say that I don't think anybody on the pro-issue one side, none of us think that abortion is an easy decision. It's not.
We would like to
Never said that, but yeah.
We would like you to have the no-votes have a quick response before we move on to our next question.
If you'd like.
If you'd like.
Sure.
In fact, you want to?
I just wanted to touch on the do no harm, because as a bioethicist, that's something I studied thoroughly and deeply. And the concept of do no harm, first of all, the Hippocratic Oath isn't like a legal requirement of any degree. It's just something that's kind of unanimously accepted. And in addition, it's not taken like super literally. For instance, in order for me to get my polio vaccine, I have to get a shot, and that's painful. It hurts, and it leaves me with a boo-boo that I have to get a sticker for. My doctor, when they administered that, did harm to me, but it is an instrumental harm for an intrinsic good. And instrumental is just, obviously it's like it's towards a different thing. An intrinsic thing is something that's good for its own sake or bad for its own sake. Pain is bad for its own sake. But it's instrumental versus intrinsic, and although there is some instrumental harms that come with abortion, such as the weighty mental capacity, I don't think anybody goes into abortion under the impression that this is not a healthy decision and a weighty moral decision to make, but it is ultimately a decision that has to be made. And just because it involves some level of instrumental harm doesn't mean that it outweighs the intrinsic good. Let's move on.
Issue 1 does not institute any specific age restriction for abortions. What concerns, if any, do you have with this, and how should those concerns be addressed?
Yeah, so if we're talking about, you're saying for anyone of any age going to abortion for
Yeah, I mean, issue 1 doesn't offer any specific criteria for what age of an individual.
Yeah, so there are more issues in Section B than simply that, but, which is what we're talking about here. So it says, obviously, in point number 2, about the state cannot directly or indirectly prevent this in any way, a person or entity that assists an individual in exercising this right. So, for one, yeah, I think that the idea that parents cannot know that their children, not talking 17 or younger, as we typically know legally, cannot know that somebody from a school, that, it says person or entity, which those terms are never defined, which tells me this is very dangerous because you can stretch that. Now I get it, sure, the law, you can write a law in for that, but at least on face value, there is no real definition of person or entity, and that to me is a very dangerous thing. But at the same time, the idea that parents don't have to know legally what's going on essentially in their own home, and that their children are getting abortions without their knowledge, I think is very troublesome with this amendment. But at the same time, yeah, I think that, just allowing children to get abortion, to get abortions.
I'll add to that. Individual is defined in the Ohio Constitution. It means everybody. And we have a current law that says, you have to get parental consent. If you're 16 and you want to get an abortion, you have to get parental consent. This is constitutional. This is not statutory. So this is very likely to override that. And then the argument against this, the argument was made in Michigan. It didn't happen in Michigan. Okay. Do you think somebody's not going to make that argument? That somebody who's especially vulnerable, a child, who's faced with making that decision, and an abortion doctor is just going to do it, and then he's going to get tried in court, and is going to make this argument, and say that, oh yes, this overrides parental consent. And in fact, it's ingrained in the Constitution. The Ohio legislature can't then repass anything to do anything about it.
I would like to present some new language maybe to use around talking about abortion. And I wouldn't refer to healthcare professionals that provide abortion services as abortion doctors. They provide a wide range of reproductive services. It's not solely abortion. Further, pretty much every clinic, there's actually currently, let me see if I can find it. I think there's 6 clinics in Ohio currently that provide full service in terms of abortion. Those all require that their patients be over the age of 18 unless they have parental consent. So I just wanted to point that out. It's very highly unlikely that that would change after the passing of this bill.
This is the textual view means individual. That would override all of that.
I don't necessarily think so, since these are all healthcare centers, and they explicitly require that their patients, if they're not over the age of 18, that their parents must be present and consenting to.
You should have the policy, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
I would also like to point out that I think this is fine, mostly in the instance of, first of all, it doesn't matter the age. A child has the ability, once they have a period, they have the ability to get pregnant, and putting an age limit on this would be dangerous. And in addition, take for instance a child who is in an abusive situation, whose parents could have severe retaliation that could affect their life and possibly lead to something as serious as suicide. Allowing somebody to get an abortion without a parent's consent could be a life-saving measure for somebody within that situation. And it's not like this is an impossible situation. I know there are plenty of parents who would be furious at a child for getting pregnant, much less getting an abortion. And for their own sake and safety, I think it's all right, it's permissible. Is it, ideal? No, but permissible. To be able to allow wiggle room for those sorts of things, yes. And in addition to what our partner said, a lot of good medical practices and clinics do require things of their own personal volition. the consent and presence of an adult. I think it would also be great to include something like a caseworker for instances like that, but overall, I think it is permissible for those extreme exceptions which need to be accounted for.
So are we saying that because there's a few parents, a few families out there who would be, you know, and again, like, what does this mean? Is this just, you know, the extreme version of, you know, potentially like abuse by parents, but just because there's a few of them out there that we just have to strip everybody's rights away now, all the parents' rights away from knowing these things that are going on? I mean, for one, we're talking about, you know, the killing of innocent human beings, but at the same time, now it's, well, because there's some parents out there who either disagree or who might even, you know, abuse their children. Because there's a few of them out there, now we have to strip every single parent's rights within a constitutional amendment, mind you, of knowing this is going on and of being able to talk to their children. I think that's quite a stretch and a leap.
Yes, because if a child, hopefully the vast majority of children love and trust their parents and will bring it to their attention willingly, and that basically solves the problem. If the child is fearful of their parent retaliating against them, such as kicking them out, abandoning them, abusing them, placing extreme restrictions on them, etc., I would rather have safety measures in place for that, because if you are a good and responsible parent, then your child will come to you in these circumstances, and you don't need the law to force them to do that.
So let the parents decide that, and then prosecute the ones who do what you were describing as far as abuse and those things. Don't just strip parents' rights away from knowing anything.
I think that puts it very simply, in that it doesn't look at how complicated these things can be. And you were talking about how there are a few cases. Ohio is a very large state. It's more than just a few cases. I mean, nobody would say that why we have to do this isn't unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. It's not ideal. It's not what any of us want. But it's better to have those protections to protect the people that need it than to leave people who do need it without anything that would allow them access to health care.
I also wanted to bring up, when we're talking about children especially, so just a really brief history. So in 2019, that's when the 6-week abortion ban was put into place. But within the small time that bill was passed, there was a news report that a pregnant 10-year-old girl who was raped from Ohio had to go out of state to neighboring Indiana because she was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. I mean, that's heartbreaking. And her parents brought her over state lines. I mean, it makes me want to cry. It's so upsetting that we're going to prevent life-saving health care to people who are in these situations. I mean, simply, that is a life-saving piece of medical autonomy that was completely appropriate for those parents to exercise with their children. I just think when you express it as murder, right, it's very cruel and unacceptable to put that onto the people who have to go through these difficult decisions. And I think it's very important that we see that medical autonomy is important. And a majority of the people who go to get an abortion are not going in willy-nilly thinking it's some fun excursion. No, absolutely not. I mean, overwhelmingly, it's a troubling decision. And in fact, according to, going back to the Guttmacher Institute, a lot of women who have had an abortion say that they very largely examine the moral aspects of their decision. And some of them described abortion in their opinion as wrong, but they also said in the same breath that the indiscriminate bearing of children is also wrong, and that their abortion was, in their words, the right thing and a responsible choice. I just don't think it's appropriate to be name-calling women and people who have uteruses who are seeking health care.
I don't believe. Sorry.
So ORC 2919-195, subdivision B, subdivision A of this section does not apply to a physician who performs a medical procedure that in a physician's reasonable medical judgment is designed or intended to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or to prevent a serious risk of the substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman, the 10-year-old could have gotten an abortion.
But they did.
No, so I'm sorry, just to clarify, so this was, basically Roe v. Wade got overturned in 2022. The 6-week abortion ban went through in 2019. So after the fall of Roe v. Wade, the courts granted, initially the 6-week abortion ban was largely blocked. So following the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the courts granted DeWine's request to allow the banning of abortion as early as 6 weeks. And so within that time, this young girl was brought to clinics that provide full service in terms of abortion health care, and they were turned down within Ohio, which led them to have to leave because they were 3 days over that cutoff.
And I'm saying that medical provider was wrong legally. They were wrong about the law.
And I would just like to...
I'm sorry, I'm just confused. It's a 6-week abortion ban, meaning that the cutoff is 6 weeks, so when
No, I'm
somebody
saying it's not 6 weeks, because if you look at subdivision B, it said that in the life and the health of the mother, which includes our poor 10-year-old, could have gotten an abortion, no matter what week it was.
Also, I just want to clarify, I don't love the mocking tone for poor 10-year-old. I mean, this is a heartbreaking case.
Well, you're using it because you're choosing the most vulnerable, sickest case to make your argument. You clearly know how damaging that makes us look, and you're trying to call us, that we're going to call, mothers that are desperate and that we're going to call them murderers. We're not. You're trying to insinuate that we're
But
these...
I will point out that you have been using the word murderer as it comes to those that have abortions throughout this entire debate. I mean, I'm not trying
I'm talking about the doctors. I look at the doctors no better than a Derek Chauvin.
I think that we should clarify that this is not a case meant to make you look bad. This is a case just talking about the facts. This is a fact that came up that deals with an abortion. It's important to discuss it. It has nothing to do with making your side look damaging. It has to do with discussing the reality of the situation.
And let me just forward something real quick. So when it comes to this idea of abortion, so I know that there are 3 types of abortions. There are spontaneous, medical, and elective. The elective is what we're talking about. We're not talking about medical abortions. We're not talking about ectopic pregnancies, which you cannot reimplant the embryo. We have no way of doing that, so unfortunately that's just a tragedy. Number 2 is spontaneous abortions, miscarriages. It's already in the books that miscarriages are actually taken care of. That's a lot of scare tactic on the pro-choice side that say, well, actually they don't. And if a doctor does not, they are breaking the actual law that's going on. And then also this idea of, when it comes to this, if there are issues with the pregnancy itself, and this is what is being discussed here, is that...
We have to move on. We can give you 30 seconds to wrap up.
Yeah. So, when it comes to this, when either the mother or the child's life are in danger, you save one, you don't lose both. So whichever one you can save, you save it. Whichever one you can't, that's just a tragedy. But again, you don't just indiscriminately choose only one or only the other. They're both valued the same and have the same rights, have the same right to life. It's just, so there's no so no one's trying to put one's life over the other. So it is save one, not lose both.
All right, we have to move on. Okay, so before we move into our final question, we would just like to remind our participants of the values of civil discourse. We would like to remind you to assume that your people who are not voting the same as you are making their arguments in good faith and to treat others with respect. Now for our final question, and please tell me if you need any sort of clarification, do you believe doctors have the right to opt out of performing an abortion? There will be a follow-up question. This will be in 2 parts, but first we'd like to hear from all of our panelists, and then we'll move into the second part.
You say you're asking if they can opt out, if they have the ability to opt out of an abortion?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Come back to you.
Yeah.
I think that that's a very complicated question, but I definitely think that if it is a life-saving abortion that has to be done, then no, they should not be able to opt out because it's needed to save a life.
I would agree with that.
I would also agree that if a healthcare provider has the responsibility to provide what is deemed healthcare, And if they don't wish to do that, then they shouldn't be in the field.
And then the second part of that question is, would your opinion change if we expand this policy to encompass entire hospitals and healthcare systems? This comes from certain healthcare systems, this question comes from certain healthcare systems being a religious affiliation who refuse abortions and other types of reproductive care because of their religious affiliations. Do you believe that is an ethical decision?
It would have to depend on your definition of abortion. So if your definition of abortion is the elective side, is that abortion is intentionally killing innocent human life in the womb, then yes. If we're talking about, an actual life of the mother in the sense of like during birth, during labor, she hemorrhages or something happens and you have to step in, yes. Is that an abortion because you are ending a pregnancy? Yes. But that is not the intentional killing of an innocent human life. So I think that yes, that should extend to whole hospitals in that context, in that definition.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I don't think anyone in the country would say that, someone who's dying and somebody who's in, dire straits that, would force, a birth. No, and that goes to the you're going to opt out, whatever you're going to opt out as the doctor, but, we're always going to look at my life as a mother.
And so to clarify, in the case of spontaneous abortions, you would allow for healthcare systems to not refuse?
You mean not refuse?
To provide the medical care, even if they have a religious affiliation.
I'd say, yes, you can't refuse, but I guess can you repeat what you're asking?
Yes, the question was, do entire healthcare systems or specific hospitals have the ethical ability to opt out of providing abortions and other types of reproductive care?
You have the ethical obligation to save life, but you have your conscience, and I'm not going to say that you have to violate your conscience.
I apologize. Can you repeat the question one more
No,
time?
that's all right. Would you consider it ethical for entire hospitals or healthcare systems to opt out of providing reproductive health care, or medical care, in order, would you be willing, is that an ethical ability that they have, that they can opt out of providing reproductive medical care?
No. Especially because if you take that logic, it can just kind of continue on in the sense of if they decide that vaccinations, it's against their religious affiliation, then they don't have to get vaccines, and especially in areas wherein the only hospital that is accessible to you, there's just one within a 20-mile radius, which does in fact exist, especially in the rural areas of Ohio. I think, especially in those areas where you don't have other options and you cannot go to a hospital that does elect to do it, that hospital needs to provide all types of confirmed medical care, like the scientifically proven, what's the specific word? Evidence-based medicine. They should be able to provide it and allow their patients to opt in or out.
I would completely agree. As somebody who did grow up in a very rural area where there is just one hospital, it's important that healthcare centers do provide everything that is medically necessary and everything that can allow somebody to have access to healthcare.
I would agree. I think that healthcare professionals and the healthcare systems have a responsibility to their patients to allow them to prosper and have a healthy and safe life, and part of that is providing abortion care.
All right, if we're all set, we're going to end the pre-written question section and move into audience questions. Thank you guys for your participation.
Scoot over.
Due to time constraints, we're just going to ask one audience question for this.
Many argue they stand against issue 1 because it goes against their personal morality, philosophy, or religious stances. Do you believe this is contradictory of the sentiment of separation of church and state?
I don't believe I mentioned one Bible verse the entire time up here, so.
I don't believe, it's a complicated question because of how you would want to view the Establishment Clause. I believe every law we have is based on, predicated on some conception of what you think is good, what is morally good. And so for that reason, I don't think there really ever is a separation of church and state because we all have our philosophies, we have our creeds, we have our religions. Each of us up here believes in a good. You believe in a good, and that's what you proposed tonight. You made the best arguments you possibly can for what you conceive to be good. And so have we. And you are the voters, and you're going to decide. And God bless you for it. But I'd say, in my view, there really isn't a separation of church and state, and anyone who throws that around really doesn't take philosophy very seriously.
I just wanted to clarify that I do think that separation of church and state is critically important, and I wanted to build off sort of what you were saying about how it is very difficult to separate personal ideology when it comes to legislation. But I also would like to bring up that a lot of religions actually support, or at least don't condemn, abortion. I mean, in fact, one of the biggest resources for those that are, let me see if I can find it. A lot of papers up here. One of the biggest resources across America, especially in Ohio, is one called Abortion's Welcome, which is a non-judgmental, written and interactive site where you can call into clergy, and they serve as a compassionate religious counselor in terms of abortion. So, I mean, I think in saying that you can't separate church and state, I mean, not everybody's Christian. I think fundamentally most of the arguments against abortion come from a Catholic or Christian viewpoint. But even within Catholicism and Christianity, there is room for abortion to be morally correct.
I just say that you believe what you believe is correct, and whatever it is you do throughout your day. And you're going to have religious folks of all walks of life, Wiccans, and you can point to Catholics that are pro-choice. But, you know, I disagree. I morally disagree. I think they're wrong. And I think the law should reflect what I think is morally right.
I fully believe in the separation of church and state, but I will say that I do think that in a lot of ways it is idealist to think that it wouldn't affect how we go about voting or how we go about our everyday life. What I do believe is that to the best of our ability, we should try to separate our religious views from what is medically necessary and what is healthcare.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Many argue they stand against issue 1 because it goes against their personal morality or philosophy or religious stances. Do you believe this is contradictory of the sentiment of separation of church and state?
So people are opposing of it because it goes against their religious beliefs?
Or moral or philosophical beliefs?
Philosophical
Do you believe this is contradictory of the separation of church and state?
Like having them oppose it because it opposes their personal beliefs or their religious beliefs? I suppose in a way, if we begin to allow religious beliefs to influence the state, then you could do just a whole darn lot of things, such as banning pork. The consumption of pork goes against a vast majority of religious beliefs across the board. You could also say that it's morally wrong to eat pork because they have a very similar intellectual ability as dogs, and they also are kept as pets, just like dogs. And there is prohibition against the consumption of dog meat in America. So you could start making arguments for a lot of things such as that. So I do think that a person can vote however way they please, but introducing legislature that is fundamentally built on any specific religious system and no other points of emphasis that are universalizable I think that would start to encroach on the separation of church and state. So voters can vote however they please based on whatever their belief system is, but introducing bills that are founded on certain religious beliefs, I think, would begin to open doors for a lot of issues.
I also just wanted to add, sort of as a concluding statement for myself at least, that it makes me very frustrated and scared that I would potentially not have the option to have an abortion if I needed one, especially being a young woman who's currently in school. I don't have the money or the room or the life goals of having a child. So the idea that I would be basically forced into birthing a child is very upsetting to me. And I think even if you morally or religiously think it's wrong, I don't think it's right for you to force your moral or religious beliefs onto somebody else's bodily autonomy and the choices on what they do with their body.
So I'd just like to add to my quick response earlier. So the idea of separation of church and state comes from a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists, where he tells them, because they ask him, hey, we're not still going to be, if we just escaped religious persecution, are we going to still be able to like practice our faith without being encroached upon? Thomas Jefferson then says, yes, there will be a wall of separation between church and state. What he meant was that there was not going to be a national religion of the United States. Not that lawmakers can't use their own faith and judgment to vote on legislation. So, with that being said, yes, people are going to vote on this issue based on their religious and philosophical beliefs, and that is not an encroachment on separation of church and state. If there is a congressman in the state legislature or in the U.S. representatives who votes on their own faith, that is not breaking separation of church and state. That is just simply their own view, which is typically what's going on with a lot of the policies being voted on, is that we're not creating a national church, a national religion in America. We are simply voting on our religious convictions. With that as well, so again, like I said earlier, this is not encroaching upon, we can call it encroaching upon bodily autonomy, but that ends as soon as you are killing an innocent human being, and that's what I will stand on. And again, from the biologists and embryologists as well, who agree on this, that life begins at conception, at fertilization, new human DNA. So, yeah, I don't think this is an encroachment on separation of church and state. It's also just not the idea of what separation of church and state is. You have to understand what it means before you can say whether it's violates it or not. So,
I would actually disagree on the point of senators and our public representatives of voting on their own personal religious beliefs. They are meant to be public servants that are representative of the entire populace's beliefs. So them voting based on their own personal religious beliefs rather than the reasons that we in fact voted for them would in fact encroach upon the separation of church and state, because they are not meant to be doing it of their own wills and volitions and their own personal ideas. They're supposed to be representatives that we elected because we believe that they can represent our beliefs and our wants up in Capitol Hill, because it's not like every single one of us can be up there. So I not to argue at your end point, just that nuance.
Well, typically, so if a district wants to vote in, real quick, a representative who shares their views,
We're gonna end it there just so we don't divulge into a discussion about our democracy. But we do want to thank all of our panelists. If we can give them a round of applause. Welcome to head back to your seats, and then Christian's going to close us out here.
Let's hear it one more time for our moderators and everyone who made this happen. Once again, I would like to remind everyone to please make your plans to vote. Please do it by Tuesday. And if you have any feedback and did not give it to us already, please scan this QR code and let us know your thoughts. We'd like to keep it as possible, and your feedback will help us make them better and better.